All right, guys, welcome back. I wanted to show you one more thing before we get started with our weekly assignments. This is a PowerPoint that is in your classwork, but it's way, way back. So it's back in Unit 2. We started talking about it, and I want to talk about it just for a minute to kind of remind you of what I want you to do when to remind you of all the different types of irony um, that we have talked about, okay? Because they're going to start coming up a lot, especially in this next assignment that's due Tuesday night, okay? And that's your first assignment, which we're going to talk about it as well. So, if you remember, the definition I gave you of irony, and that's kind of a funny cartoon there, but it's all irony is in general is a contrast between expectation and reality, right there, okay? Now, it comes from a word, the etymology is from a word that means feigned ignorance, like faking stupid, or dissimulation. Um, but essentially, it's kind of when there's a difference between expectation and reality, okay? Now, there's three types of irony that we're going to talk about. There's verbal irony, situational irony, and dramatic irony. Okay, so verbal irony is when what is said is the opposite of what is meant. Now, a lot of times, the only way people can identify verbal irony is looking for sarcasm, but sarcasm doesn't really cut it because sarcasm is verbal irony, but it's only not all verbal irony is sarcasm, and you see that more and more when you look at Shakespeare. He uses a lot of verbal irony that is definitely not sarcastic, but it's still verbal irony. But you don't see it a lot in modern times. So, here's some verbal irony that's just run-of-the-mill sarcasm. Uh, it's so delightful to be quarantined all day with a screaming 2-year-old, right? That's obviously I'm saying the opposite of what I mean, but I'm doing it in a kind of sarcastic, biting, and funny way that's meant to ridicule the situation. Okay. Um, okay, but I showed you guys a video one time of Mark Antony, his speech in Julius Caesar. And remember, I set the scene by just telling you essentially that Mark Antony here is Brutus has just killed Caesar, Brutus and the conspirators, and now they're trying to argue for the mob. So Brutus gets up and he says his side, and he wins the mob over to his side. This is why we had to kill him. He was ambitious, blah, blah, blah. So Mark Antony gets up, and Mark Antony just says over and over again, um, he says over and over again, Brutus is an honorable man. Brutus says he was ambitious, and Brutus is an honorable man. So are they all honorable men. But he says it so many times that the anaphora, the repetition of it, lets you know that he really means the opposite. Okay, so Brutus is not an honorable man. He's trying to get that into your head. But it isn't exactly sarcasm. He just says, Brutus is an honorable man. So many times, by saying it that many times, that's verbal irony. He really means the opposite of that. Okay, so that's an example of verbal irony that's not sarcasm. And we'll talk about one more in Macbeth in the next act. It might be Act 4, but essentially when somebody, I think it's Ross, has to give the report to Macduff that his family's been killed, and he says it's a pun as well because it has a double meaning. But he says, they were at rest when I did leave them, or something like that. And really, they were dead. So he's just saying the opposite of what he means. So it's a pun, but it's also verbal irony. Well, we'll have to analyze it. All right, situational irony. This is what you think of when you think of irony. When what happens is the opposite of what is expected. Okay, like a guy driving a Pepsi truck, drinking a Coke. Okay, or fire station burns down, police station gets robbed. This is what happens all the time, though. You study really hard for a big test, and then fail it, and then the next test you don't study at all, and you get an A. Driver's license one I told you about. You're very excited. You just passed all your driver exam very good, and then you're pulling off. You pass the test, and you pull off, and you run over the guy who was your instructor. That's not that funny. That's kind of morbid. All right, so dramatic irony is what we're going to be talking about with this scene from Lady Macbeth. It's when the audience knows something the characters don't. The reader has some sort of inside information about what's going on. You're kind of in on a secret. That's one way to look at it. So, of course, this is the TDA we're talking about. In Shakespeare's Macbeth, when Macbeth is washing his hands alone after he's killed Duncan, it seems to him that the blood will not wash off and that all the waters of the seas could not wash the blood away, which is, of course, hyperbole, extreme exaggeration, but rather it'll turn the whole green sea red. The irony comes into play when Lady Macbeth returns to the scene and quips, "A little water clears us of this deed, so it's no big deal." And that's just a contrast, right, between expectation and reality, but more so between, it's a contrast presented through something the audience knows that characters don't. Okay, and we did a little test. What type of irony is this? Telemarketers have a no soliciting sign. Situational. This is what kind of irony? You said dramatic, you were right. We know something that the characters don't. The rust on them can. It's supposed to stop rust, but it's covered in rust. That's situational. This is kind of like, well, obviously we know what Scar did, right? But Simba doesn't, so that's dramatic. Childhood obesity sign right next to a McDonald's bag sign. Situational. Here we know one of the characters doesn't. That's dramatic. It was hard for me to do verbal. That's situational. This man, I forget who that was. George the Animal Steel. He was a great professional wrestler back in the day. This man grew hair all over his body except on his head, right? That's interesting. Who wants to take an escalator up to the workout, you know? So funny. But that's how we are. Okay, now, let's go to your assignment. If you go to your Google Classroom, you see I've just put e-learning assignment 4 up there. Let me just go back to the beginning of this. This is fourth block. That's fine. All right, so I posted posted the rest of the reading analysis up there, and I posted this. Instructions. Let's look at it. All right, so if you look at it, it's a TDA based on Macbeth Act 2, Scene 2. Okay, and I think I have a better version that I can edit over here. So I'm looking at it. We've been over this time after time, but essentially what Macbeth says is, "Will all Neptune's oceans wash this blood from my hand? No, this my hand will rather the multitude of seas in Carnadine." Lady Macbeth comes back and says, "A little water clears us of this deed." So, to answer this question, pretty simple. What kind of irony is presented in this situation? Dramatic. It is dramatic because we, the audience, know something that character Lady Macbeth doesn't. Please excuse me if I can't. Right? And what do we know? We know essentially that we know what Macbeth said. He used extreme hyperbole, right? Is the blood symbolic of anything here? What do you guys think? Usually blood is symbolic of guilt. Now, if it is symbolic of guilt, I want you to think about this. This is more your TDA type question. What does it mean that Macbeth thinks the blood will turn the whole ocean red, while Lady Macbeth thinks the blood will wash right off? I would say that maybe Macbeth is feeling guilty, but Lady Macbeth isn't? Something like that. Let me get into a little bit more of an analysis. According to what you know about the story, about Macbeth and about Lady Macbeth so far, how do you think the couple's attitudes will progress for the remainder of the play? Will Lady Macbeth remain cold-blooded and persuasive? Will Macbeth remain more timid and hesitant to do further crimes? Will they switch roles? Macbeth becoming more bloodthirsty, Lady Macbeth becoming overwhelmed by guilt. This is your chance to make a prediction, okay? So this is you. It should be a short little blurb. It needs to be more than one sentence, but it needs to be your prediction, okay? That's how you do that.